welcome to ConTinual, the convention that never ends. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and with me today is the beloved best-selling author of science fiction and fantasy, Jody Lynn Nye. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We're thrilled you could make it. Oh, you have so many novels out there. I last count over 45, over 100 short stories. How did you get started telling stories?
Oh, I've always been telling stories ever since I was very small. I came up with characters that I found interesting and I wanted to explore, mostly through make-believe and getting my younger brother to participate in this. The fellow who grew up to be a double doctor, MD, PhD, researcher, scientist, husband and father, crawling around on the floor while I pretended to be a green cat and he was some other kind of alien when we were even before school. And when I finally was able to write, I was writing down my own stories, but in the meantime, I was telling them to whichever one of my relatives or friends would listen.
Oh, that's wonderful. Did you study writing in college?
Yes and no. It's really difficult to take a college degree in writing. I taught at a college that actually has a degree in writing. Mm-hmm. But I question whether they can teach you to be a writer. They can teach you format and they can teach you structure, but I don't think they can teach you to be a storyteller. Mm-hmm. And I know some absolutely brilliant storytellers who are not formal in their approach at all, mm-hmm. but they're compelling and wonderful, and you want to go back to their works again and again. Oh. Yes, I did take a class in college because I thought I should. Mm-hmm. And the teacher hated genre fiction. He just despised it. But what he liked were what my two friends and I called crock stories, as in you can imagine what was in the crocks, but they were I looked into the mirror while I was shaving, and I cut myself when I was shaving, and as I watched the blood run down, I thought of life. But the funny thing is that the three of us were writing genre fiction. I was writing mystery, my friend was writing a political thriller, and my other friend was writing science fiction, and we were the only A's in the class. So,
because you were storytellers.
We were storytellers, yes.
Did they also go on to careers in writing?
I don't know. The fellow who wrote the political drama really wanted to be a cutting-edge journalist, so I imagine that he's doing that.
Oh, cool.
It's been a long time since I've been in touch with them, but I hope that they are well and that they are doing exactly what they want. Yeah.
And it was a problem when we were going to school. Everybody looked down their nose at genre. It was as if it didn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm afraid that if it paid the bills, then of course it could not be art. You had to starve for your work, whereas I like having electricity and like food in my refrigerator and things.
Yeah, but, rent.
A great friend of mine, Todd Cameron Hamilton, who did the artwork for the Dragon Lover's Guide to Fern, had a button that said, "Michelangelo was a commercial artist." It's outraged his teachers.
It is true. It is true. He accepted commissions to pay the bills. And he took on students for the same reason. Mm-hmm. Oh my. About this time, you started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and you also worked for Mayfair Games. How did your experiences as a gamer and a writer for a gaming company contribute to your career as a fiction writer?
Well, I was always a freelancer for Mayfair. I was at the time working for a television station in Chicago. I was the technical operations manager, as a matter of fact, and I think that it gave me a good background. I was already playing Dungeons and Dragons in college, so when I went into the professional world, long before I met my husband, that it was more make-believe out loud, just like when I was a child. Mm-hmm. And that I found to be wonderful. So many people give up on their imaginations when they grow up, and that is a terrible pity because that was what made childhood so wonderful. And gamers, especially role-play gamers, love to get back into that, and they live it for a couple of hours every week or every month, and now online every day if they choose.
Yeah, watch the
So I find it healthy. I find it terrifically healthy. Gaming, writing gaming materials was helping to feed the people who loved doing it, giving them something else to play with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it did seem to grow a lot of writers over the years. I mean, how many people have started with gaming and gone, I want to fix this expedition. I want to create a story that's not within the realms that are described on these pages, but the pages started it. So I'm so glad that game writing has finally achieved recognition at the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America. And so, but you did meet two of your most famous collaborators, well, three if you count Bill, your husband, through Mayfair Games, Anne McCaffrey and Piers Anthony. Could you tell us a little bit about the projects that brought you all together?
Well, with Anne, she of course was the source of the material, the Dragon Riders of Pern. The Mayfair created the Dragon Riders of Pern game, and in aid of that, her teenage son, who was in college at the time, interned at Mayfair Games over that summer. So he was able to say, yes, that works for Pern, no, that doesn't, and became a friend, a very close friend. And when I met Bill and started working with Mayfair, naturally, Anne was a great part of that. My husband came up with this project called Crossroads that was going to use Choose Your Own Adventures were a very big hit for a while in the 70s, and I think they even go back farther than that a little bit. And he wanted to license worlds, fantasy and science fiction worlds, and have books written Choose Your Own Adventures in licensed worlds. And he asked Anne if she would allow this to happen. And she said, I promised Jody Lynn Nye that while she lived, I would publish with no one but Del Rey books. And Bill took this like a gentleman, which he is, and found many other people who were willing to say yes. Christopher Stasha, Piers Anthony, Roger Zelazny, a number of very well-known science fiction and fantasy writers who are allowing people to step into their worlds. He was also at the same time creating a similar series for Ace Books called Combat Command, in which people took an army, a space fleet, an expeditionary force, and commanded it in the same way that an individual was working in the Crossroads books. So Todd actually wrote one of those books, and it was his first independent publication, and he did a good job on it. Mm-hmm. So the time came when I had to tell Anne what I was doing with Dragon Harper, which was my first Choose Your Own Adventure book. And we went off to NorwestCon to meet her because she was the guest of honor, naturally. And I was nervous as I could be, just absolutely frightened to pieces, because I was meeting the great Anne McCaffrey, the wonderful writer whose works I really loved. And Bill left me in line in the hotel to go off and try and find her. Well, while he was gone, I noticed that two people ahead of me in the line was a woman about my height who had shoulder-length silver hair. And when she turned her head, I noticed that it had been streaked on one side with blue, red, and purple. And I thought, well, I don't know who she is, but she's part of the convention, obviously. And then Bill came back from the hallway, and he opened his arms, and I thought he was coming towards me, and he said, Anne! And this woman opened her arms and said, Bill! And I realized there she was. I'd been near her the whole time. I got to explain how a Choose Your Own Adventure worked to her, and she could not have been nicer about the plot or what I had planned to do with her precious Master Robinson, who for that first book was only a journeyman, an apprentice harper who had just made enough progress that they were going to send him out on his first assignment. Mm-hmm. But I also had to explain how probability trees worked, so that if you failed, the story went one way. If you succeeded, the story went the other. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, I drew her a tree, but she didn't quite get it. So I wrote her an 8-page story, which Todd has recently returned to me from her things, called Robinson Hits the Sauce, in which Master Robinson goes to a Bendon Weir gather or bend and gather, we're party afterwards, and does indeed do what he does best, which is clean out wineskins. And she thought it was hilarious, but she also got the idea.
Sometimes
after that, we got along very well. I wrote several books with her, and she gave me a lot of praise for it, a lot of encouragement. She could not have been nicer about that. Working with Piers Anthony on the same project, because he also gave his permission for Crossroads. We went down to interview him for the visual guide to Zan, and he thought I made good puns. And I got along very well with him. He's a very sensitive man. So I appreciate that. And I really love what he does with the story. So it was a treat.
Yeah. He was also one of the first to take advantage of electronic publishing, as I recall, because he had his own website to put out his books and bring them back into view much earlier than a lot of the big names of his generation.
He was an early adopter of technology, and I think that was brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. Totally. I was thinking, though, as you were talking about Master Robinson, about the writer's dictum, show not tell. You told her how the probability tree worked. You did the diagram. You had to show her in the story. So, I mean, talk about that. Had you already begun to sell your own fiction at that point?
I had. I had been writing things of my own for many years by that point. I have notebooks full of the screeds of stories that I came up with, and trying things out, trying out different styles, trying out different story types. I write a lot of everything. I've even written a horror story. That's not my milieu, but I have tried it. And I had been publishing in the Middle Kingdom newsletter for the Society for Creative Anachronism. I'd been writing a humorous saga, which I had inherited from the previous editor. But I was also I've written 12 fan fiction stories.
What worlds were they?
Mostly.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I saw you had been interviewed for a Doctor Who podcast, and I'm going, I didn't think she'd written in a Doctor Who universe, but this explains it.
Right.
Yeah.
I was in the anthology Chicks Big Time Lords, because I've been a Doctor Who fan a very long time.
Yeah.
I've been privileged to meet quite a number of the actors of classic Who. So that's been a treat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's always nice to meet the people who give you so much pleasure, whether it be an actor bringing a role to life or a writer who's created the worlds that you've dived into during good times and bad. So and especially if they're polite, and I understand that most of the Doctor Who's are. They are rather nice people. Yeah,
they are very lovely people. 2 years ago, 3, I had the privilege of sitting next to Sylvester McCoy at the DragonCon banquet, and he is a dear man. So that was a special treat. I hadn't met him before.
Cool. Oh, how cool is that? DragonCon is wonderful for those kinds of encounters. Yeah.
One of my favorite places in the world.
Mine too. Mine too. Been coming since 1998, and floof. We just had floof.
Well, yes. Con crud is just a way of life. You're just going to have to deal with that.
No, I was talking floof as in the tail that went right in front of your camera.
Oh, yeah, it's Minx. Minx is here.
No, not floof.
Oh, floof. Yes, she is you are a floof. Well, you are. You're gorgeous. She will continue to do this throughout our talk, I'm afraid. So this is interview with occasional cat.
That's fine. I mean, it is not a panel unless you have a cat. It is not a Zoom panel. It's part of the rules.
I think with Zoom, you have to have a pet of some kind or a toddler. And I feel sorry for that poor man whose 2 children entered the room while he was trying to do a very serious financial podcast.
It was a given. It was a given that it was going to happen that way.
It was very funny.
Yeah. Did you find, since you had started writing your own fiction, did you find it harder or easier to work with somebody else,
Well,
once you got past the, oh my God, it's Anne McCaffrey. Oh my God, it's Piers Anthony moments.
it all depends on the ground rules that you set in advance. And with Anne, she was in charge. That was easy. All I had to do was do whatever she said because she's Anne McCaffrey, for God's sakes. With somebody who was closer to being a peer, then we had to work out our own ground rules on who was in charge of what, who wanted to do which characters or which scenes or how they wanted to split it up. And there has never been a collaboration that was the same as any other. So they're all different, every single one of them. And even the same collaborator from project to project, there can be a difference depending on, say, who came up with the initial storyline, or you did the villains last time, I want to do them this time, or I have a real insight into this character, so I would really like to take everything that she does and steer it. So working with another collaborator, I find I work faster than I do working on my own. And I explain things better because you need to be on the same page, no matter what it is, even the tiniest details. I had two friends who used to write fan fiction together, Star Trek fan fiction. And I was the first person to point out to them that they'd been writing together for 8 years and they each spelled several of the words differently in their parts. And no one had ever said to them, you know, this word is there's an extra H and an A in here, and you have an I where she has an A, and they never noticed. So that's a simple ground rule, but it's an important one of who's going to go back over it and give it continuity, whose eyes are going to be the last on it before it goes to the editor, and who's the tiebreaker if you disagree on something. Now, naturally, you should try and work things out. But if you're not working with somebody on the level of Anne McCaffrey, then you need to be able to respect each other's point of view. I think that's the primary thing that you have to have for your collaborator is respect, and a belief that they can do the project, and that you respect their talent and their storytelling ability and their perseverance. But you also have to be prepared to do 100% of the work because stuff happens.
It certainly does. And that sort of segues into another collaborator of yours. You know, how did you wind up working with Robert Asprin?
It turns
and
out,
taking over, actually.
Oh my gosh. Well, Bill and Bob were best friends. He and a fellow called Walt were all partners in crime. They had a business together. They liked to hang out together. They had an amazing amount in common. And so when I got to know Bill, I had been reading Bob's stuff since college, loved it. And he said, well, let's go visit them. If I was scared to meet Anne McCaffrey, can you imagine what it is to go into their own domain of Robert Asprin and Lynn Abbey?
Yeah, not one, but two major writers.
Because I had read Daughter of the Bright Moon and I thought it was brilliantly done. Lynn is one of the greatest technical writers I know, and she's a terrific storyteller. So I revere her talent, and she was incredibly kind to a beginning writer like me. So off we went to the town they lived in, and they were endlessly kind to us. And Bob and I found that we had a ridiculous amount in common. We both loved show tunes and cats and humor, and we had a similar sense of humor. So Bob's sense of humor was never mean. And a lot of people who think that they're going to duplicate the Asprin touch don't realize that even inserting a little bit of rancor or meanness to it is defeating the purpose. Because his characters, the people who are friends in his world, never let each other down. And they may razz each other unmercifully, and they do, but they are not, the humor is never mean. And he also didn't resort to scatological humor. And I'm afraid that I included a fart joke once. I don't need to do it again, but I did do that. And Bob had avoided such things. And an article that I found about the Myth Adventure called The Humor in It Dad Jokes. And that is not a bad thing, because yes, people may groan at it, but they'll still enjoy it.
Speaking of Bob Asprin. Unfortunately, he passed away in the middle of a series of books that you had planned to write together, in the myth world. And you continued them, and really, it's hard to tell. I've read Bob, I've read you, I've read the books you wrote together, and when I'm reading the books you wrote together, I can't tell who wrote what, which is, as anybody who's ever worked in tandem with another writer knows, the mark of a successful collaboration. But, at the same time, though, Bob's style is not the same as yours. I mean, when I read, for example, View from the Imperium, it's a very Wodehouse voice, or
Yes.
the Fairy Godmother's Union. It's a very, it's the kind of voice you expect from professionals in the middle, in a big city like Chicago. But the voice that you hear in myth is so much of a Bob Asprin voice from other projects. And yet you came in, you just sort of match beautifully. And it's not just with Bob, it's with the collaborations you've done with Anne McCaffrey too. I've seen this. Where does this ability to capture and write in another voice come from? How did you develop it? I mean, is there a training course for that?
There is not. It's just me. I'm a very good mimic, and I have a little bit of a theater background. So characters, you should be able to distinguish them by their voices, by the way they speak, by their choice of words. Morton Drucker, the cartoonist who does Beetle Bailey, said that you should.
Oh yeah, I know who you mean. I don't ask me at the moment, but yeah, I can see the comic, right?
He said you should be able to tell the characters apart by their silhouettes. You should be able to tell them without seeing them fully. And the same should go for their dialogue. If they have a way of speaking, if they have a means of drawing out a sentence or using flowery words or being very abrupt and terse, that should, without using a he said, she said, be able to distinguish the characters. And I have always had terrible eyesight, so I paid attention to, say, the voice actors who did cartoons. And I'm a huge fan of people like, not just Mel Blanc, but Walker Edmiston and Dawes Butler and June Foray, probably the greatest female voice artist of all time. There are amazing people who create a character just by voice alone and just by the pitch, the speed that they speak at. Do they drawl? Do they drop letters? And I think that I just carried that forward into writing as well. But I read Anne's work intensively before I started working on those projects. And I got a compliment, well, sort of a compliment, from the editor who was working on the Crossroads books, who said it was really nice of Anne to go over and revise Jody's book for her. And I went around snarling for a while, but it was kind of a compliment, even though she didn't mean it as that. But she was unable to tell that Anne had nothing to do with it. And the same goes for Bob. I read his work very intently, and no, it's not identical. He made different word choices than I do. He knew his characters in a way that I can only aspire to. But I think I do okay.
Yeah, no, you do. You really do. It's the unity of tone is remarkable in all of those collaborations. And do you ever find that, working with Bob or working with Anne or working with Piers, do you ever find that their voices carry over into your own work, or is it just sort of like there's a seawall there and it washes against it but never crosses over?
It really doesn't. That's their style. And when I'm working in their world, I am imbued with their style. When I work on my own things, that's me, and that comes from within me. So I don't think that it overlaps. I can work on 2 or 3 things at the same time, and they all seem to stay in their own lanes, which is good. There are times when I might read something that affects me. So I am careful not to read science fiction when I'm writing science fiction. I'm careful not to read mysteries when I'm writing mysteries, because it comes in your eyes and out your fingers. So, it's tricky.
Well, and if you have the mimic gene, as it were, it really does. You know, I can try to mimic people. They never quite sound like anything but me, putting on a funny voice. But, you know, I have friends who are writers like you who, you know, in the ear and out on the page, you know, they can hear an actor and write dialogue for the actor. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, I can see where that would be an issue. But, you know, 2 or 3 things at once. I'm in awe of that too, by the way. And I guess it shows them that you've written so many wonderful worlds of your own. The world of mythology, the world of dreamland, the Fairy Godmothers Union, the View from the Imperium. Which comes first for you when you're looking to create a project, a world, or a story within a world? The world, the characters, the plot?
They are all different. With the mythology series, the location came first. When I was in college, there was this wonderful library where the entry hall was done in like 14 colors of marble. And it was a palace to the book. And it had stacks in the back. And when I was there, I was frequently there because it was not only my favorite place, but when there was no one else to hang out with, I went and hung out with the books. Mm-hmm. And back in the stacks, which were half height or maybe about half height levels, even late at night, you could hear voices. And there was nobody else on the same floor that I was on. So obviously it was coming up through the ventilation ducts. And that stayed in my memory for years. Then there was a sort of what if? Well, what if there was somebody there late at night? Who would they be? Mm-hmm. And that sort of grew up. That sort of grew out and blossomed. And then I needed, of course, a main character who would be the kind of person who would go looking for those people whose voices he could hear. And Keith Doyle is in a way a fantasy character for me because he's outgoing and he's friendly and he's confident in ways that I never was. So he's a wonderful character because he's very positive. Mm-hmm. And even when he fails, he picks himself up. But he's not a dummy at all. He's a very smart guy. He's very compassionate. And he wants everybody to be happy. Well, as happy as anyone can be. So he was a great character for me to be able to write. I enjoyed him. For the others, they all have their place. The Taylor's Ark books. I really love Shona and her husband Gershom because I consider them to, after reading a lot of stories, practically the only happily married couple in space. And they have their troubles. They have their challenges, but they have each other. And as far apart as they ever are, they still have that bond and the love. And naturally, they're surrounded by wonderful characters. And you notice that Disney always has 2 cute little characters that talk to each other and help the main character. But I have Chirrell, who is an intelligent creature in his own right, very intelligent. And I was pleased to be able to give him his own story that one time. But I really, really, really love the Imperium series because Thomas is like Keith Doyle squared, and then to the 6th power. Because yes, he is in many ways Bertie Wooster, but Bertie Wooster has a lot of descendants, and one of them is Lord Peter Wimsey. Mm-hmm. And one of them is Francis Crawford of Lymond. And they are smart people who do things behind the scenes. And Thomas is kind of growing up to be like that. So no spoilers. But he is very overprivileged. He is very rich. And he comes from a culture where he and his cousins and all other nobles can get away with, well, way too much. But they're far too self-centered to cause trouble to do negative things to the ordinary person. They're just so overprivileged that you don't even recognize what it is that they're doing some of the time.
They're often their own little world within the world, as it
Oh,
were.
absolutely. And it's fun to play with that. I had somebody say, all of Thomas's cousins are terrible people. And I said, and I really dislike them. I said, you're supposed to.
Yes, they that little bubble world of P.G. Wodehouse, Jeeves and Wooster, and
Mhm.
it still exists, and there are people within it who are probably harmless, but you look at them and go, how could you even think that? It's just not there, which is, of course, why you need a Jeeves, or in your case, a Parsons. So
Parsons is the sanest man in the galaxy. Thank goodness.
talk about somebody working behind the scenes, though.
Oh yes, oh yes. He is. He has always been there, and he always will be. And he's a marvelous creature. He's a mentor. The trouble with a lot of mentors in stories is that they frequently go away, leaving the main character to get on as best he can. But Thomas will always have something he has to learn.
Did Fourth View from the Imperium, which I think is your longest series to date, if I'm not mistaken.
But there's only 3 books in it.
Only 3 books? Okay.
So far.
Okay, but you know, how did you set out with the concept of that? You know, like Jeeves and Wooster in space?
Oh yes.
Or,
Yep.
oh, okay. So that one was a concept first.
That was the name of the computer file I established when I got the idea.
Oh,
Jeeves
cool.
and Wooster in space.
So
I love Woodhouse's stuff because his characters are fantastic characters, snapshots of people in the Edwardian era. They're just terrific. And all of Bertie's aunts and other peculiar relatives and his friends are fantastic.
And the funny thing about, you know, they're over the top, all of them, but so many of them remind you in some way or another if you've got a big family. And, you know, I do, and I think you do too, in terms of the cousins and the aunts and the uncles. And there's sooner or later you're going to run into, oh my God, she didn't just do what Aunt Vi did. Yes, she did. Holy crap. You know, it's like, and you wouldn't think, given how extreme they seem, how extreme their privilege is, but how much everyday reality is still in that.
Oh, it fails to impinge on them at all. Even if they run into reality, they deflect it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is here they are, these reality deflection machines, and you can see them. I mean, there were times I would look at my Aunt Mary after having read in college way too much P.G. Wodehouse ago. How did little old Italian lady from South Philadelphia, whose husband runs a beer distributor company that never sold a bottle of beer in its life, we know where he made his money, how did she look? How is she behaving like a character out of Wodehouse?
Because they're archetypes. They are archetypes. They are extreme examples of real people. And they have lives, they have loves, they have disappointments, they have triumphs. They string each other along. They tell the truth at uncomfortable moments, and they're very real in their own way. So that's one of the geniuses of Wodehouse and Pratchett and Mark Twain, who has all of these real people in it, but they are exaggerated. They're blown up so that you can accept sometimes a very harsh reality without rejecting it immediately. You have a moment to absorb them because they're being absurd.
Yeah, the absurdity is so important on that.
Yeah.
You know, but all of these stories, whether it be the world shown as Ark, whether it be the world of, you know, Dreamland, which we haven't discussed yet, you know, they all require their own world. They're very different worlds. And they're very different genres within speculative fiction, you know. Do you find that the world building is the same for them? I mean, I've heard it said that world building is essentially the same regardless of genre, whether it be mystery or romance or historical novels. You still have to build the world and make it real enough for a reader to step into it, and know where they are.
Yes.
In that sense, it's all the same. But have you found that to be the case with your different worlds?
Oh, absolutely. You have to be able to create a world that you have created for the reader, a sense that off to the other sides, things are still going on. It isn't all in the arch of the proscenium, and outside it's just cardboard or nothing at all. You want to give them a sense that the world has this reality, that the economy is continuing to go on, that rivers flow, that people are traveling outside of it, that people are falling in love and having children, having jobs, having disappointments, having their triumphs, away from your story. So that at some point, if you choose, and a lot of writers do, to pick up a story that is taking place in another continent, another island, or even another room, and say, you know, I brought up this character and I had her as a spirit carrier in one story, but I think she deserves her own. So the world building is really important for that. The geography, everything plays into how a society works. Geography is surprisingly important. What divides one country from another, what keeps one from being conquered, when you're telling a story about terrible things happening to a population, it almost always has to be isolated physically for it to work, because otherwise people can run away, or they can tell somebody that something is going on. In that way, you have to develop what's the structure of government. And no more than 10% of everything that you have imagined and written down, and write it down because you will forget, should ever appear in your story. My first editor, Brian Thompson, wonderful man that unfortunately no longer with us, said, don't air your education. You should always be writing from the knowledge of the world rather than hammering people with facts. You absolutely have to bring something up, do it as a contrast. Like, well, everybody in this country wears silks, and in my country, silk is a really precious and exotic thing, but here everybody has silk, even the dustmen. So that's one way to bring out a facet of a new world or a new country that you want to give to your reader.
Yeah, definitely. And the old iceberg rule.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the science fiction and fantasy community prides itself on paying it forward. Anne McCaffrey was a rather famous example of this. She nurtured your talent. She nurtured that of several others, through collaborations and in just working with, and to a certain extent, being that final voice saying, no, that doesn't work, because you did it yourself in the Stellar Guild series from Galaxy's Edge, or I should say the Stellar Guild series published by Arc Manor Publishing, which also publishes Galaxy's Edge. Right. But you've taken it one step further. You've become a teacher of writing. How did you get in? What made you decide to, become a teacher and hold a course every year at DragonCon? What was the genesis of this?
The genesis goes back quite far. I have been doing writers' workshops at various conventions for years. WindyCon, Chicago's big regional, has a very good writers' workshop that has been overseen over the years by a couple of people, currently by Richard Schwedick, who is a Nebula Award-winning writer and very good writer and a gifted teacher. I really respect everything he does. But I have also done small seminars for libraries, the Evanston Writers Workshop, the Off-Campus Writers Workshop, and a few others have invited me to come and do teaching. But when DragonCon has had a writers workshop, 2-day intensive course for many years, that was taught by Anne Crispin for 17 years. And when she was no longer teaching it, they actually came to me and said, would you be interested in taking this over? And I thought about it, and I had before this happened, I worked for Columbia College Chicago, which is an arts college, where you can actually get a degree in fiction writing.
The one you mentioned earlier.
That's right. So in 2007, I took over from Phyllis Eisenstein, who is a wonderful fantasy writer, the Fantasy Writers Workshop. And I had 16 students, and it was a 4-hour class once a week. And the students were, I followed her curriculum, expected to turn in 2 full short stories and quite a number of other small things over the course of the semester. So it was a good experience for me. But I realized that I did not want to teach in a formal setting like that for the rest of my life, because I wasn't getting any of my own work done. And while I appreciated my students and I thought that some of them turned in some breathtakingly good work, that I was going to have to walk away from it. So it's currently being taught by a lady called Tina Jens, who, this is her stage. It's as if it was waiting for her, and she's done a brilliant job. The course that I taught was also at one time taught by Gene Wolfe. Oh. So it has good bones. And when I decided that I would take the DragonCon gig, and this will be year 11 for me, I can't believe it's been going on so long. It just feels like I started doing this. It's been, yes, an opportunity to give back, because DragonCon charges far less for the seminar than any other 2-day writing workshop that I know. And I read the manuscripts that they turn in, I critique them, we workshop them in class together. Everyone who wants to have their piece workshopped, because not everyone does. And I found that to be a pity, especially a few years ago when I had a very talented man turn in a practically finished piece that was all but ready for publication, but he didn't want it done in an open workshop. So I'm the only one who saw it. And I think that's a terrible shame. So I encourage people, sit in the hot seat. It's worth it, because everybody in the room has skin in the game. Everyone else will be in the hot seat at one point or another. And I have found this to be a fairly successful model. I've had at least a couple of my students publish since then. I've had one who won an award, a scholarship.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yes, quite a bit of money, and I'm very happy for her. And I encourage anybody who has never tried a workshop where you will talk about each other's work, because these people, your fellow students, are also your readers. And while I may be going into the technical stuff as a published writer, an editor, an anthologist, and all of the other, and as a literature critic, because I also did the Galaxy's Edge book reviews for 4 years, the people who are writing stories with you are also the ones who are going to read your work. So getting peer review is a really good thing, especially in public, in face-to-face, where they have to look you in the eye and tell you what their problem is with your work. But I do encourage everybody to say something positive, even if it's, you have lovely typing.
Your spelling is great.
Because there always is something good to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there usually is. That is an element of critique that I helped with the Washington Romance Writers contest for many, many years. And they have a handout of lest ye, and it is titled Lest Ye Be Judged. And the first paragraph, the first principle is always start with something positive for the work you're reading. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, it's the same, even though it's more, you don't have to sign your assessment in this particular contest. But as you say, we all have skin in the game. We are all writers who will be judged in one form or another. And what people don't seem to realize is how many books writers buy just because we got into this because we read.
We read. I've become one of the judges for the Writers of the Future contest, which is the largest speculative fiction contest in the world and one of the few really free ones. You can submit every single quarter until you win, or until you become a pro in your own right elsewhere. And we see, I just finished judging for this quarter, and there were so many really, really good stories. The advanced techniques, the terrific world building, the great characters just make me so happy because also I may be a published writer, but I read a lot. I buy a lot of books. So please write something I can read.
Yeah. Write something you want to read. Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and people want to read you because you have great comic timing in your work. You've got such a wonderful sense of the absurd. We've talked about this in terms of View from the Imperium, but also in your myth books. You know, all of and it crops up whether you try to hide it or not in things like Fairy Godmother's Union. And, you know, lots of times there are laugh out loud moments. Yet I know personally, from a literary standpoint, comedy is a really hard sell. What draws you to writing humor, and why is it important?
Oh, I grew up on the Marx Brothers, and I grew up on classic sitcoms and funny books. And there's already too much grimness in the world. If I want to be depressed, I can watch the evening news. So it would take a lot to get me into a book that is nothing but angst. But if you are feeling blue, pick up a wonderful humorous book, something that'll make you lift your spirits, make you happy. One of the problems with humor is that people love it and they appreciate it, and they don't vote for it in terms of awards or anything like that, because many people feel that their vote should be significant. It should be for something meaningful. And yet they go back and they read our humorous books anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's telling that in all of the years the Academy Awards have been given, there have been 2 films that were humorous that were given the Academy Award for Best Picture. 2.
What were they?
It Happened One Night with Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert, which was, I think, 1934 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And A Fish Called Wanda. All the rest have been serious dramas.
Yeah, you know, Greg and I usually sit around looking at the list and go, okay, which one's the most depressing? Dang, it's the winner for Best Picture again. But yeah, you're right. I've seen It Happened One Night several times, and A Fish Called Wanda more times than I can count. Mm-hmm. You know,
but if somebody tells me that a book of mine is their favorite, that's really good, and that makes me so happy. So I would encourage anybody who sees this, not just me, but if you go up to a writer and tell them that you really enjoyed a book, it means a lot to us, because otherwise we're here with the keyboard and our screen and the words. So encouragement, telling us what you liked about it, and seeing if you spotted any of the jokes that I buried deep in something because I thought it was funny. And maybe one person out of 1,000 will find it.
Mm-hmm. Easter eggs all through the books. Easter eggs.
Totally.
Yes. Okay, we're coming up on the end of our time, just, you know, almost exactly on our projected time. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I think that despite the fact that the pandemic has been very, very hard on people, it's been terrific for getting a chance to read. And it's been a boom time for writers to have book sales. So it's been a terrific time for me to discover writers. And I hope that people have taken a chance on different kinds of literature that they've never dared before. One of the things that I have always had ever since I started reading science fiction back when I was aware that it was science fiction back when I was a teenager, was to have somebody that I would go back to as a safe place. And that for me, that was Andre Norton. Uh-huh. Yes. Because I could read something hideous and daring and scary that would give me nightmares. And then I could go back and find something of hers that I hadn't read yet, because she had written so many books. Mm-hmm. So take a chance. You might find something that you'll love all your life.
Yes. And I hope they will take a chance on yours as well, because loving them all my life.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Jody. And thank
it's a
you.
Pleasure.
Great. And thank you out there from ConTinual, the convention that never ends.